Hi, my name is Laura Butler, and today I'll be demonstrating a basic total physical response lexicon intended to allow Level 1 adult ESL students who are true beginners, false beginners, or new arrivals to the US who fall into either category to express a desire for help in the area of basic needs. This workshop is designed for ESL teachers, tutors, and volunteers who work in community centers, colleges, and other organizations that provide educational services to vulnerable populations. I will specifically discuss the case of Spanish-speaking migrant populations who have been bused to sanctuary cities like Chicago, New York, and Denver later in this presentation. I'd like to begin by addressing a simple reality. As teachers, tutors, and volunteers who work with English language learners, we often find through our work and our position that we become confidants to students who are experiencing a crisis. While we tend to have positive feelings about our students and a strong desire to help in any way we can, there are limitations to what we can do and what we should do. We are not social workers, medical doctors, or therapists, but there are times when students ask us about these services. While we cannot fix urgent needs issues on our own, many of us are connected to organizations that specialize in handling these problems, and we can connect students to these services when they request it. For example, as a GED tutor in Chicago, I have directed students seeking treatment for HIV to Howard Brown Health Center, a highly respected network of clinics that caters to the LGBTQ community and offers payment on a sliding scale for low-income individuals. Many of us who are professionals or volunteers who work with vulnerable or oppressed populations are connected to a variety of social services that can be immensely valuable to our students if they only knew what to ask for and how to ask for it. I would like to take a moment to discuss the relationship between basic needs and basic rights. In his 1980 book, Basic Rights, human rights theorist Henry Shue argues that there is a set of rights that are so fundamental to human well-being that if one is unable to secure the substance of that basic primary right, no secondary or tertiary rights can be argued for or successfully attained. For example, we can all agree that everyone has the right to physical safety. However, if the basic right to safety cannot be guaranteed, a secondary right, such as the right to assemble, is functionally non-existent. In this framework, the right to education is considered a tertiary right. So this means that a student must have their right to personal safety guaranteed first, then they must have the right to assemble or freely associate with whomever they wish. Once these two rights are guaranteed, we can work on fulfilling the right to education. Furthermore, Shue goes on to argue that as agents with the power to do so, we have a three-pronged obligation in ensuring the rights of others. First, we must not deprive anyone of their basic rights. Second, we must protect against the deprivation of rights. And third, we must aid those who are deprived of those rights in attaining them. It is this last point in particular that dovetails with our role as adult educators. We're in a unique position to facilitate the attainment of basic rights to our students who are not able to do so. Following this understanding of the relationship between needs and rights, as well as the nature of our role as facilitators of needs and rights in an educational context, we must also take into account our students' communicative needs. Essentially, Level 1 ESL students may need to access vocabulary that is considered advanced in relation to their beginner designation. In those instances, total physical response, also known as TPR, can be tremendously useful in teaching students how to ask for help from their teacher. To summarize briefly, TPR is a method for teaching meaning through physical action. Generally, TPR is a useful tool for teaching beginner vocabulary and simple commands using bodily gestures or props. We can use TPR to bridge the gap of communicative needs in order to ensure our students know how to ask for help from their teacher when they are ready to do so. Trauma-informed teaching practices advise us to allow our students choice whenever possible, as choice is empowering. So a student may understand that she needs help, but may not feel ready to ask for it, and we must respect that choice while simultaneously reinforcing the notion that we are available to connect students to the appropriate services at any time. I propose a 6-item TPR lexicon that addresses the following areas of basic need: access to food, access to suitable housing, urgent medical needs, experiences of violence or abuse, and emotional disturbances such as depression, anxiety, or PTSD. I chose these 5 areas because in my experience, they are the most common issues for which students have sought my assistance. This brief vocabulary set should be taught within the first week of class, ideally after a basic TPR lesson that covers the vocabulary items head, fingers, shoulders, chest, hands, and stomach. In a multilingual classroom where the teacher does not speak the student's L1, I feel that it is appropriate to use translation software, even though we usually avoid this practice in ESL classrooms. But we can think of this similarly to how we might train students to respond to a fire drill, as attention to basic needs is a matter of safety, and we must be sure that students understand why they are being taught this vocabulary. I have chosen the number 3 as a theme for this vocabulary set, as it represents the triune relationship between the student, the teacher, and the service organization to which teachers will connect students. The first vocabulary in this item in this vocabulary is students will be taught that either before or after lesson time, they can hold up this signal, which will mean I need to speak with you privately. We may not always be able to ensure absolute privacy in a classroom where other students may be entering, exiting, or just sitting. So it will be up to the teacher to determine an appropriately private space, such as an alcove or empty hallway. I would recommend against speaking to students privately in a room with a closed door, as this may make some students uncomfortable. The following 5 items cover the 5 needs I've addressed above. Each gesture will involve the student tapping on a body part 3 times to specifically designate that the student wants assistance in the relevant area and will not be confused with the student simply touching their own body in a casual way, such as scratching their head. Students should be invited to repeat the corresponding phrase in English in alignment with typical TPR practices. Ideally, teachers will prepare a handout with pictures of themselves or another person performing the gesture alongside its matching English translation, so students can refer back to the vocabulary at their convenience. Let's take a look at the vocabulary items together. I invite you to perform these gestures along with me as I explain. This will mean, I want to speak with you privately. This will mean, hungry and I want help. This will mean, homeless and I want help. This will mean, sick and I want help. This will mean, abused and I want help. This will mean, upset and I want help. Please feel free to rewind the video at this time to further familiarize yourselves with the gestures and their meaning. Once a student has requested help using this system, the teacher should provide them with a list of resources and explain any relevant details, such as directions to a clinic or food bank, any paperwork the student may need to bring with them, or the possibility that money or payments may be necessary, though I strongly advise teachers to search for reputable services that are free, very low cost, subsidized, or sliding scale. Teachers should prepare a list of resources for each of the 5 needs areas and be prepared to make any phone calls on behalf of the student to make sure that service organization can accommodate that student's need. Now, let's take a look at an example. I will play the role of a student. Now that you know the vocabulary, please take a moment to answer the following question. What 2 things did I just ask for? I first asked to speak with the teacher privately, and then I asked for help addressing an instance of violence or abuse. At this time, the teacher may repeat the second gesture to indicate that she understands, or may use another indicator if she feels that will be easier for the student to understand. For example, a teacher may not be a speaker of the student's L1, but may know the phrase, "I understand," in that language. The use of the word "okay" may be sufficient here. It's important that this phase for the teacher to be very clear in communicating that she understands the nature of the request. I decided not to include a specific "I understand" gesture, as teachers may have better strategies to communicate understanding dictated by their own knowledge of their students and the environment in their classrooms. After understanding has been established, the teacher will provide a physical copy of a list of resources appropriate for the student's request and answer any questions to the best of her ability. At this time, the teacher may also offer to make any phone calls on the student's behalf, such as calling a medical clinic to help set up an appointment. It may be necessary to seek out a translator if one is available, but this translator should never be another student, as they will likely not understand how to keep the situation appropriately confidential. If there are barriers to understanding important aspects of attaining services, I feel it is appropriate to use translation software. Now let's take a moment to practice the TPR Basic Needs Lexicon, specifically for a Spanish-speaking classroom. Many of us are currently facing an ugly reality wherein migrants from Central and South American countries have been forcibly bused to sanctuary cities like Chicago, New York, and Denver. Furthermore, due to various policies and bad actors, many of these migrants have been re-traumatized and are likely to need our help in some way. Now you might be saying to yourself, "But Laura, I don't speak Spanish." Good news, neither do I. Fortunately, many of us have had the unmatched experience of watching our English language learners take risks with language, thereby improving their abilities, so I think we can extend the same willingness to speak their language during a difficult time. By the end of this section, you should be able to listen and memorize 6 simple vocabulary items in Spanish. Let's give it a try together. Please pardon my heavy American accent. Quiero hablar contigo en privado. I want to speak with you privately. Hambriento y quiero ayuda. Hungry and I want help. Sin hogar y quiero ayuda. Homeless and I want help. Enfermos y quiero ayuda. Sick and I want help. Abusado y quiero ayuda. Abused and I want help. Infeliz y quiero ayuda. Unhappy and I want help. Those of you who are familiar with Spanish might have noticed that I use the verb quiero, which means I want, rather than necesito, which means I need. Because as I stated earlier, the request for help in the system is based on a student's choice to ask for it. Students may misinterpret "I need" as a command or an obligation the teacher expects them to fulfill, and we must steer clear of that misconception. Choice confers dignity and empowerment. Furthermore, while the gestures will remain part of the classroom, students will come to understand their meaning in English, thus enabling them to make the same requests in other environments and advocate for their family members and friends. The vocabulary words hungry, homeless, sick, abused, and unhappy can be recycled through the term in other vocabulary lessons. For example, the words hungry and sick would fit neatly into a health unit. Teachers should look for opportunities to reinforce access to these words in more relaxed contexts. Before we conclude, I'd like to address some possible problems that could arise in teaching students to ask for help through a TPR-based system for the purpose of brainstorming. I welcome any insights and critiques in the following areas. Firstly, we should consider the nature of gender in our classrooms. Do your students come from a culture where speaking about health issues in front of a different gender is taboo? If you feel this issue will make it difficult for students to learn the vocabulary, you may consider breaking the classroom up into small groups. Secondly, we must be aware of the possibility of re-traumatizing students, and my suggestion here is to use a neutral but friendly tone and consider pausing the lesson if it becomes clear if one or more students have become distressed. I welcome any further tips. Lastly, though this problem may occur with relative infrequency, we must acknowledge students who are missing body parts or who have mobility issues that will prevent them from using the basic needs lexicon. In this case, teachers can be creative in adapting gestures to accommodate a student's physical differences. In conclusion, a TPR basic needs lexicon allows teachers, tutors, and volunteers to bridge the gap of communicative needs in our students to make sure they have what they need to learn. We know students cannot learn if they are hungry, tired, or depressed, and we are in a unique position not only to help students out of those situations, but to teach them to advocate for themselves and eventually for others. I would like to close with an important reminder for all who are watching this presentation. Take care of yourself. In our roles as adult educators working with vulnerable populations, we can become depressed or overwhelmed by the realities we encounter in our classroom. Students may disclose experiences that are difficult to hear, and we should recognize that in seeking to help, we pay an emotional toll ourselves. If you feel you cannot handle a situation, ask a colleague for help. Remember to practice self-care in a way that is effective for you. My personal self-care routine involves a daily yoga practice. Please feel free to leave a comment sharing your own self-care technique so we may learn from each other. The work you do is so important, and showing up for your students day after day is hard work. Just as our students cannot learn if their needs are not met, we cannot be effective teachers if our basic needs are being challenged. Let's be sure to take care of ourselves as we seek to take care of others so we can create a classroom environment that bolsters our students' education. Thank you for listening to this presentation. You can find references to sources I used and recommended reading in the description of this video. Adios!